They say these new Chinese EVs can go 1,000 kilometers on a single charge. Sounds incredible, right? But here's the question nobody's asking. 1,000 kilometers where? On a test track? In a lab? Or in the real world, with air conditioning, traffic, and cold weather? Because what Chinese automakers are claiming right now could change the entire EV game, if it's true. Today we're putting those bold claims under the microscope. Companies like NIO, BYD, and XPeng say they've cracked the code on battery range, crossing that mythical 4-digit mark. But before you believe the headlines or the flashy ads, let's figure out what's really going on behind the scenes. What kind of batteries are they using? How are they testing range? And more importantly, can any of us actually expect 1,000 kilometers when we drive these cars in the real world? Let's break it down, step by step. Here's the big problem with EVs right now: range anxiety. People love the idea of electric cars. They're quiet, fast, clean, and futuristic. But they're still scared of running out of juice halfway through a trip. And for years, this has been the one thing holding millions of buyers back. Even though the average person drives less than 50 kilometers a day, nobody wants to spend $60,000 on a car that might leave them stranded if they take a long road trip. So when Chinese EV makers came out and said, "Hey, we've solved that. Our cars can do 1,000 kilometers," the internet exploded. It sounded like EV heaven. But like all big promises in tech, there's always a catch. Let's dig into what 1,000 kilometers actually means, and whether that's the real story. Let's start with the basics. What are these Chinese EVs actually doing differently? The battery revolution. Battery. Most of these cars are powered by something called semi-solid-state batteries, a middle ground between today's lithium-ion and the future of solid-state technology. Traditional EVs, like a Tesla Model 3 or Hyundai Ioniq 5, use liquid electrolytes inside the battery. They're proven, safe, but limited in how much energy they can store per kilogram. That's why you rarely see real-world range beyond 600 kilometers. But semi-solid batteries change the chemistry a bit. They replace part of that liquid with a solid-like substance, which allows higher energy density, basically more juice in the same space. Think of it as cramming more water into the same bottle by changing how the molecules behave. One of the first real examples is NIO's 150 kilowatt semi-solid battery pack. On paper, that's a huge leap, 50% more capacity than most top-end EVs today. With that, NIO claims its new ET7 sedan can reach over 1,000 kilometers of range under the CLTC cycle, that's China EVs official testing standard. Sounds amazing, right? But here's where things get tricky. Not all range numbers are created equal. Every country has its own testing standard. The US uses EPA, Europe uses WLTP, and China uses CLTC. And here's the thing, the CLTC test is way more generous than the EPA or WLTP. CLTC stands for China Light-Duty Vehicle Test Cycle, and it's designed to mimic typical urban Chinese driving. But in practice, it means slower speeds, fewer stops, and lower load on the car. It's like measuring how far you can walk downhill with a tailwind. It looks great on paper. To give you an idea, a car that gets 1,000 kilometers on CLTC might get around 800 kilometers on WLTP and only about 650 kilometers on the stricter EPA cycle used in the US. So when you hear 1,000 kilometer range, the real question is, under which test? Because real-world driving with air conditioning, passengers, and highways is usually 20 to 40% less than those test numbers. Still, you have to give them credit. Chinese automakers are innovating like crazy. Brands like BYD, NIO, XPeng, and Li Auto are in a massive arms race. They're competing not just with Tesla, but with each other. And in China, range is the new horsepower. BYD's Blade battery was the first to prove that lithium iron phosphate, LFP cells, can be both safe and efficient. Then, NIO stepped in with battery swapping stations, where you can replace your drained battery in under 5 minutes, something Tesla gave up on years ago, And now with semi-solid state batteries, they're trying to show the world they can leapfrog the West entirely. But here's where it gets fascinating. None of this is really about driving further. It's about making you feel like range is no longer a problem. Once consumers stop worrying about distance, EV adoption skyrockets. That's the psychological game behind the 1,000 kilometers headline. Now, why does this matter so much? Because this shows how quickly Chinese EV technology is catching up, or maybe even surpassing, global players. While American and European brands are still scaling up production, China has turned EV innovation into a national mission. Government support, huge R&D budgets, and a massive domestic market mean they can test, fail, and iterate faster than anyone else. In 2025 alone, China is expected to export over 5 million EVs, many of them boasting these next-gen batteries. Companies like CATL, Contemporary Amperex Technology Limited, and WeLion are becoming the new global battery powerhouses, supplying not just Chinese brands but even European automakers. So, when you see a headline like 1,000 kilometer Chinese EV, it's not just marketing, it's a sign of how far ahead the battery tech race has moved east. Of course, there's a catch: cost. A 150 kilowatt battery pack isn't cheap.